What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my Week 7 top 36 wide receivers, also splitting these guys up into different tiers. Already went through my top 36 running backs in a different video that's posted if you guys are interested, but let's just dive right into it. We're going to start off with the Tier 1 wide receivers. These guys are always going to be locked into your starting lineups. We're going to have Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Devontae Adams. Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp continue to ball out. Stephon Diggs, always a very solid mid to high end wide receiver one. Keenan Allen just continues to produce, even though Herbert missed him a few times on Monday Night Football. Still had a solid fantasy day. A.J. Brown has been balling out after the slow start. Amon-Ra St. Brown coming off a big day. I guess the one player in this tier one that maybe, isn't coming off a pretty strong performance would be Devontae Adams. He's had 2 down weeks. I've seen some people in my comment section, asking how I'm feeling about him. Seems like people are getting a little worried. Personally, I'm not. Early on in the season, he was playing at a super high level, still averaging over 17 PPR points per game. So over 6 games, that's very impressive production. Really not worried. Also a strong matchup here against the Bears. Hopefully it's Jimmy G. If it's not and they go with Brian Hoyer, I still think he's a really nice option. So definitely not a guy where I'd be considering sitting him at all. Definitely would still have him locked into my starting lineup. Now moving into tier 2, a little bit of a smaller tier. We're going to have Brandon Ayuk, Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, and Puka Nacua. So for Brandon Ayuk here, playing on Monday Night Football, you have Christian McCaffrey day-to-day, Deebo Samuel day-to-day. It's possible that he's going to be their clear-cut top weapon if both Deebo and CMC miss. And even if those guys are playing, potentially they're not 100%. Like the matchup here against the Vikings, I think Brandon Ayuk is a very strong play. Then we're going to have Jalen Waddle. He's been solid. Eagles secondary hasn't been as locked down as, their run defense. So I think he's a nice play here. Think this game could end up being a shootout. Then we're going to have Chris Olave going up against the Jaguars tonight on Thursday Night Football. Olave had a nice bounce back game. He was coming off of 2 kind of lower volume performances, so good to see him bounce back. Still didn't get into the end zone, only 1 touchdown on the season, but the volume is totally there. And then we are going to have Puka Nacua here, coming off his first kind of down game, I guess. Maybe he had 1 before Cooper Kupp came back, but I'm really not concerned. His volume was still impressive. When Kupp goes for, a monster game, there's not going to be a ton left for the other wide receivers. It'll happen. I think Puka is still a really nice wide receiver one this week. And then shifting into tier 3, going to start it off with Devonta Smith. Now, we may have to be worried about his hamstring here, but assuming he's healthy, I still think he's a strong play. Seems like people are kind of, fading off of Devonta Smith a little bit. Personally, I'm not. I think Jalen Hurts could be playing a little bit better. There could be, a couple more touchdowns to go around there if he does up his play a little bit. But I still think Devonta Smith is a nice, weekly wide receiver 2, high to mid tier, depending on the bye weeks. So I'm definitely not fading off of him. Now, if that injury does continue to linger and become a concern, then you could probably move him down a little bit, but not super worried at this point. And then we're going to have DK Metcalf. Hasn't been great to start off the season. He's been fine. I just really like the matchup here against the Cardinals. I think the Seahawks are going to be able to put up some points. Then we're going to have Mike Evans. He's been impressive to start off the season. Falcons defense is kind of tough, but I still think he's a nice option here, especially with 6 teams on bye as a high-end wide receiver 2. Then we're going to have the back-to-back Jaguars wide receivers, so Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk. Now this is going to be assuming that Trevor Lawrence is playing. If Lawrence does not play, I feel like these guys probably slip to somewhere in tier 4. You could kind of just throw them in that mix. But right now, if Trevor Lawrence is playing, I have them as tier 3 options. And then Deebo Samuel is going to close out this tier. We're just not sure if he's going to be playing in this one. And we're in a tough spot, both CMC owners and guys who roster Deebo Samuel, where they're probably going to be questionable heading into Monday night. And if they're game time decisions, you're going to have to make that call, Hopefully you have a backup option, but if not, you might be stuck with them out if you started them, because you just didn't know whether or not they were going to go. So that's kind of factored into this ranking. If he is good to go 100%, he's much closer to the top of this tier, maybe even in tier 2, kind of close to Brandon Ayuk, but injury factor is going to drop him a little bit. Then we're going to have a pretty large tier 4 here, mix of different wide receivers in different situations. We're going to start it off with DJ Moore. I do think he takes, a little bit of a hit going from Justin Fields to Bajent, but I still think he's a decent option. Not a super tough Raiders defense, and this offense has really just run through him, especially the passing attack. So I still think he's going to command a lot of volume. I think in my wide receiver start sit video, I kind of compared it to Garrett Wilson, where even though Zach Wilson isn't playing at a crazy high level, they're still just force feeding Garrett Wilson. I think the same thing can be said here with DJ Moore. Then we're going to have Amari Cooper. I will say that if Deshaun Watson plays in this game, Amari Cooper would be a tier 3 option for me. I don't know if it's trending in that direction, so we could be getting another PJ Walker game or Dorian Thompson-Robinson game, which is obviously going to be worse for Amari Cooper. Even if he's going with one of the backups, I still think he's like a mid-tier wide receiver 2, more of a high-end wide receiver 2 if Deshaun Watson is able to return. Then at wide receiver 20, Tyler Lockett. Like I talked about with Metcalf, love the matchup here against the Cardinals, coming off a solid game. Then we're going to have Zay Flowers. I feel like Flowers has really, kind of found this spot here as like a back-end wide receiver 2. Continues to have a very high weekly floor. Saw him get into the end zone last week. You love to see it. Like the matchup here against the Lions, so I think he's a nice play. Then we're going to have Marquise Brown. Kyler, his practice window is opened. I would not expect him to play this week, but potentially week 8, week 9 is when we could be getting Kyler back. I think if you drafted Marquise Brown, you have to be feeling great because he has outperformed his ADP in terms of like where he was drafted with Josh Dobbs. Now he's getting the quarterback upgrade with Kyler back, and he could even improve, even more in his production. So you got to be feeling great about Marquise Brown moving forward. This week I have him as a back end wide receiver 2, and then for Jacoby Myers here, this is just all going to depend on the quarterback. So if Jimmy Garoppolo is able to play in this one, I think he's somewhere in tier 3, probably like a high-end wide receiver 2, if not like a fringe wide receiver 1. He's played at a crazy high level with Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy clearly looks to target him. Now, if Jimmy Garoppolo is not able to play, you may slip him a few spots here. Could kind of slide into tier 5. So kind of like a mid-tier ranking, but if Jimmy does play, I think you should feel great about starting Jacoby Myers. And then wrapping up this tier with Michael Pittman. Tough to put Pittman this low considering how solid he's been early on. He just draws a really, really tough matchup here against the Browns. Their defense has been lights out through the first 6 weeks of the season, so that's why he's going to be a little bit lower than normal. Now moving into tier 5, we're going to have Jordan Addison, another guy who draws a really tough matchup here against the 49ers. Didn't love what we saw out of the Vikings offense with no Jefferson. They had a nice matchup to kind of ease into that, going up against the Bears, and they really didn't take advantage of it. I still think Addison's very talented. There's probably going to be a decent amount of passing volume, especially if the 49ers' weapons are healthy. The Vikings are going to have to try to keep up. So I still like him as like a fringe wide receiver 2, but not as high as I was heading into the Week 6 game against the Bears. Then we're going to have Chris Godwin. I think he should be ranked behind Mike Evans, but I still think he's a very viable play in your lineups. Then we're going to have Christian Watson going up against the Broncos. I feel like a lot of Watson's fantasy production is going to come down to Jordan Love's play at the quarterback position. We saw last year when he was really able to have those high ceiling games, he was hitting on big plays down the field. Jordan Love is the guy who has to, give him those opportunities or get him the balls in those spots. So we'll see if he's able to get it done. We saw him targeted deep a few times in the first game he was back, like playing a legit role. Didn't necessarily connect. I think he had one, huge play on like a broken play, but nothing deep down the field. So we'll see if that switches up here against the Broncos. Still really like Christian Watson as the player. Interested in seeing how this Packers offense looks coming off the bye week. Then we're going to have Terry McLaurin. Talked about this a ton. Don't love the way the Commanders are spreading the targets around. You would like them to be more concentrated on their better weapons. If that was the case, Terry McLaurin would be a little bit higher, but it's not, so he's going to be a high-end wide receiver 3 for me. Then we're going to have back-to-back Steelers wide receivers. This is going to be assuming that Deontay Johnson plays. So I have George Pickens one spot ahead of Deontay, just because Deontay, could be a little bit limited, could be on a snap restriction. Never know how that's going to play out. If Deontay Johnson cannot play in this game, I think George Pickens is somewhere in tier 4. I think you feel very confident throwing him into your lineup. Long term, I do prefer Deontay, but for this specific week, I would go Pickens over him. Then to wrap up this tier, we have Drake London and Gabe Davis. Love the talent of Drake London. You're just kind of hoping this offense has some passing volume. And then for Gabe Davis, he's not going to have a lot of receiving volume, but he has that big playability attached to Josh Allen. And then tier 6 here, the final tier, I think these spots could have gone to a few different players who didn't make it, but I went with Michael Thomas, Joshua Palmer, Josh Dobbs, and Cortland Sutton. Mike Thomas, just very, very consistent, hasn't scored a touchdown yet, but is a very nice option in PPR formats. Maybe not a great option, but in a week with 6 buys, he's serviceable. Then we have Joshua Palmer locked into those wide receiver 2 routes. Quentin Johnston didn't do anything to, take that role away from him, so he should replicate that here against the Chiefs. Fine back end wide receiver 3. Then we're going to have Josh Downs. He would be higher if it wasn't a tough matchup. I still think he's interesting because he's kind of, their lower ADOT guy working out of the slot, but tough matchup. Don't know how many points the Colts are going to be putting up there. And then to wrap up these rankings with Cortland Sutton, like I said, this spot could have gone to a few different guys. It could have been a Curtis Samuel. A lot of Curtis Samuel fans in the wide receiver start sit comment section. Didn't know he had so many fans out there, but Curtis Samuel could have slid in here. I think Rashee Rice is interesting. You're hoping he takes a bump in his routes, but ended up going with Cortland Sutton. At this point, seems like he's the top target for the Broncos. Feels like Jerry Jeudy's kind of on his way out there if they are able to work something out. Not a great matchup against this Packers secondary, but he is going to be the last guy here. And that's going to wrap it up for my top 36 wide receivers. Hopefully with the 6 bye weeks, you guys are still able to, field a solid lineup. I know the running back position was way more rough than these wide receivers. They do fall off towards the end, but the running back position was not pretty. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. Thank you all for stopping by. Check out the running backs if you are interested. But thank you again, and I will see you in the next one.